from here in Cleveland. Hurricane Katrina had just happened, and we decided that we was going to send some money down to those folks that were suffering down there. But God had other plans. We didn't send the first dime down there. Now you think, well, our ministry dealt with fishermen, okay? And so what we noticed is that people that we fished tournaments against on Saturday, they would stay out of church on Sunday. And we thought, man, this is a terrible way to miss out on a life of eternity over a hobby. But so there were several aspects to our ministry. One of the aspects of the ministry is that, of course, we would have the fishing tournaments. When you're thinking, well, how's that ministry? At the end of each tournament, we would present the gospel before any prize money was given away or anything like that. And we just kept presenting the gospel to our friends that we would fish against. Another aspect of the ministry is that we would have fishing derbies for the Boys and Girls Club in Cleveland. And it was just, a lot of those kids had never been fishing before. And down off of Dalton Pike, there was this farm. The guy that owned the farm, he owns Preferred Pharmacy in Cleveland, and he would stop feeding his fish, prior to us getting down there. And we would use hot dogs and marshmallows for bait, and because kids don't want to put nasty worms on their hooks, And so, but as soon as you would throw that bait out there, these huge catfish would just come up. And the kids would scream across the lake, a lot of them had never been fishing before, and it was so nice to see that. But it was like a carnival atmosphere. It was, we had the blow-up toys, and we had all the things, we would give prizes away for the biggest fish, the smallest fish, the most fish, And then at the end of the day, we would present the gospel to those kids, and God was working on their hearts, and they would come to the knowledge of Jesus Christ. And it was amazing how God was blessing that ministry. Another part of the ministry is that we would, my mother had a counseling center here in Cleveland, and she dealt with addictions. And so she would open the counseling center, and we would go and we would present the gospel there to the people that were ordered by court to be there and taking those classes. And then the last aspect is that we would go to the nursing homes in Cleveland, the big ones, Bradley Healthcare, Signature, and all of them, and we would have a fish fry. The reason why I'm telling you about catch ministry is because that year in 2009, there was a farmer off of Bigsby Creek Road. He wanted us to come and get some fish out of his pond, and so we thought, well, we'll take the fish out of the pond, and then when we go to the nursing homes, we'll have the fish fry. And so, we were basically killing two birds with one stone. So we were off of Bigsby Creek Road, and typically when we went anywhere, Catch Ministry would take it was an old Coca-Cola vending trailer, and we converted it into like a little kitchen type thing, and we would serve food. So we had taken the alcoholics and drug addicts down there to catch some fish, and we were gathered around this pond, and you couldn't see the pond from the road, but our catch trailer was up there, and it had the big silver catch emblem on there. It was a fish that had the word C-A-T-C-H in it. And we parked it up there by the road so people that was coming in late could, know where we were at, because like I said, you couldn't see where we were at, because the lake was a ways off. And so my wife and I decided we were going to go up there and get a hot dog. We were serving hot dogs that day, and so we walked up there. And like I said, we're out on this old country road, and there's our trailer. And so this car goes by really slow, and it was a lady. We just met her husband about 2 months prior to that. He was the manager of the Walmart here in Cleveland, this North Walmart. And so Walmart had given a lot of money to Catch Ministry at the time, and because putting on those kids derbies were, it's like $5,000, for the all the blow-up toys and all the food and everything like that. But anyway, I had just met her husband, and I said, where's Chris at? And she said, well, he'll be by here in a minute. And she goes, what are y'all doing, by the way? And I said, well, we're down here with some people that have problems, and we're catching fish. And she said, oh. And so sure enough, it didn't seem like any time, and Chris was standing there in front of us. And he said, hey, guess what? I said, what's that? He said, I'm going on a trip. I said, where are you going? He says, I'm going to Savannah, Georgia next week on vacation. And like I said, stress will make you do things that you typically would not do. And I don't suggest you guys ever doing this, but I said, hey, can I go with you? I invited myself and my family on their family vacation, and he said, are you serious? I said, yeah, I'm serious. I'd love to get away. And he goes, well, you're more than welcome to, you know. And so sure enough, that next Thursday, I met him at his house. And so it was me and my wife. It was Chris and his wife and daughter. It was Chris's father-in-law and another couple. That couple was he was a manager of a Walmart in Chattanooga. So there we went. You know, there was a caravan of like 4 vehicles. You know, we were heading down to Savannah, Georgia, and I was so excited to run away from all the stress that I was dealing with. So we got down there early Friday morning, and as we walked into the house there was a ping pong table, and you know, you just got to play ping pong at 3 o'clock in the morning, and so we played a game of ping pong and then went to bed. But we woke up early that morning and went into Savannah, and if you've never been there, it's just a great little city. You know, it's got this old garden market type thing, and you know, you just walk around to all these shops, and they've got a candy store, and you know, just all the good stuff. But I noticed I love to fish. I'd rather fish than eat. I had rather fish than do anything in the world, you know. And so I noticed something when I was down there. I could smell it, you know. It's that salt air. And I thought, I'm really close to the ocean. And I thought, hey, Chris, I said, I got an idea. Why don't we go deep sea fishing? And he says, okay. He said, and he had been before. I'd never been deep sea fishing. And I was like, let's go. And he goes, okay, let's go find us a charter to take us out. And so we looked. We would drive up to this house, and you know, and the boat looked just like, no, we ain't doing that. And we would go. So finally, we found a marina, and we went in, and we found a captain that would take us out. And you know, you could choose the options. You can stay inshore, you can go outshore, you know, deep sea fish. And I said, I want to go deep sea fishing, because in the book of Genesis, it tells us that he gives us dominion over fish. Read it. It's awesome. And I thought this is great. This is going to be good, you know. So I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna catch me a fish about the size of Moby Dick, and I'm gonna put him on the wall, and everybody's gonna be envious of me. That's what I thought. And so we were going to go out to the Gulf Stream. And so that night, you know, I was just so excited. I was like a kid in that candy store in Savannah. I was just tickled to death to wake up the next morning. I woke up and I kissed my wife goodbye, and I told her I loved her, and I said, I'll see you later. And we went. And so we got to the marina. We got on the boat, and I was just like, oh man, I'm so excited. I had a pack of raisins I was eating for breakfast, and my buddy Chris said, you might not ought to do that. And I said, why? He said, it's going to give you the scours. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's terrible, you know. So we got on the boat and we started heading out the river. And so I'm seated on the front bow of the boat. It was me and Chris and his father-in-law. And Carl, the other guy from Walmart in Chattanooga, was sitting in front of us. And he was facing this way, and the three of us were facing that way. And the sun was coming up over my shoulder, and it was hitting the clouds in the sky. And you know the painter Thomas Kincaid, the painter of light? Well, he doesn't have anything on the painter of light, you know what I'm saying? And so it was just beautiful. It had the oranges and the purples and everything, and I was just like, man, this is awesome. And I looked over and to each side of us, because it was just a small river going out to the ocean, and it had these big marsh grasses, you know, and then I saw this big white bird, you know, and I thought, man, the thought came to my mind that God must really love me to give me a playground like this to play in. And I was just enamored with all of the things that I was seeing, because we don't have those big white birds like that here, you know, and I was just in awe of God's beauty of his creation, you know, and I thought, man, this is just wonderful. And we got out into the ocean, and I'm seated on the front, like I said, and the land is way back there, and all of a sudden it just disappears, and we're way out there, and I'm thinking, man, this is great. And we started to hit some waves, and my buddy, you know, we hit one wave, and I come up out of my seat a little bit, and Chris did too, and when he did, he moved. He got from seating beside of me, he went and he sat in front of me, and now he's facing this way, and I said, why did you do that? And he says, well, it's a smoother ride this way. And I thought, well, I wish I would have thought of that before you did, you know. But so it was just me and his father-in-law, and there was a little metal ring or something that went around the bow of the boat, and I grabbed a hold of that railing, and I was holding on with both hands. And a few minutes later, we started hitting some more waves, and instead of slowing down, the captain decided that he was going to power through those waves. And when he did, we hit a wave, and I come completely up out of my seated position like all you guys are in. I come up out of my seat, and the boat hit another wave, and I could tell that we were airborne because the motor was not grabbing water, and it was a different sound. And so I'm up in the air, and the boat hit that other wave, and I'm coming down. It's coming up, and I come down into the seated position, and all the pressure came out my back. I landed on Chris's father-in-law. We're down in the bottom of that boat, and I landed on his father-in-law, and we just came to a dead stop in the water. And I went and I put my hands behind me, and I pushed up on the seat to sit back in the seat, but I noticed that there was a big problem. My legs didn't come with me, or I thought they didn't come with me. They were still attached, but I couldn't feel them. And instantly, like just as somebody turned the light switch on, I started screaming. I started screaming at the top of my lungs, and I didn't know what was going on. And Chris took my legs, and he laid me down on the bow of the boat. And the sun is really high in the sky, and I'm screaming. And it's the type of screaming like you want to say, I wish this old boy would just shut up. And I hear the captain or somebody say, it's just a stinger, he'll be okay, and I'm thinking, man, I hope you're right, but I couldn't stop screaming. And I was getting hot, and I was getting thirsty, and my legs are on fire. They're literally on fire. And I said, Chris, could you get some ice and put on my legs? And he did, and when he did, it felt like 1,000 needles going through my legs all at one time. I said, get it off, I'm still screaming, and then all of a sudden, Carl, who had been quiet the whole time, he yelled out, somebody call the Coast Guard. And so the Coast Guard said that they were going to send a help out there to us. And all of a sudden, I guess from the pain that I was in, I started going unconscious. And next thing I know, my face is hurting. My buddy is over the top of me. Chris is over the top of me, and he's just slapping my face, And I wake up. I'm laying down. All I can say. I said, Chris, are you slapping me? And he said, yeah. He said, Mark, stop doing that. He said, you're scaring me to death. And I was like, Chris, I'm in so much trouble. I said, I'm hurting so bad. I don't know what to do. And he said, just don't close your eyes again. If you guys have ever been to the ocean, you know that the waves are just relentless. They don't stop. So anytime the boat hit a wave or a wave hit the boat, I was screaming. And about an hour and a half later, the Coast Guard finally gets there, and there was a man and a woman. They get on board, and she grabs my right arm, and she starts taking my vitals and everything. And Chris has got my left arm, and I'm just laying there looking up into the sky, and I'm like, oh man, this is terrible. I looked up and I saw a butterfly. I said, Chris, do you see that butterfly up there? And he said, no, I don't see it, Mark. And I thought, okay, this is crazy, but I see this butterfly. I mean, my degree's in biology. I noticed that I didn't see any butterfly bushes on the way out there. So this butterfly's in the air, and I have no idea what it's doing there. And I'm like, okay, but I saw the look between him and her, and it was just like, he's losing it, he's lost it, and I saw that look, and it kind of disturbed me a little bit, and I thought, okay, well, I know what I'm seeing. A little while later, I'm going unconscious from the pain and everything. A little while later, I noticed we started in toward the marina, not the marina that we had came out of, but it was the closest one. And we're going a whopping 4 knots per hour. That's really slow. So I'm screaming, going unconscious and everything. I wake up, and I see another butterfly. And I said, hey, Chris, do you see that butterfly up there? And he says, no. I'm like, oh, okay. More pain, more screaming. We're about, by the time my accident happened to the time we got into the marina, it was 4.5 hours. So every time a wave hit the boat or boat hit a wave, I was screaming. There was a Coast Guard cutter in the front of us, and there was one behind us, and they were trying to keep the waves from hitting the boat. About 3 hours into that trip, we get into, I guess, the river, and it's a lot smoother, and I noticed that we had picked up speed. I said, somebody call our wives, and well, I only have one wife at that time. But call the ladies and tell them what's going on, and so they did, and about 30 minutes before we got into the marina, I looked up and I seen another butterfly, and this time I'm thinking my buddy Chris is a little slow, so I took my finger and I followed it across the sky. I said, Chris, do you see that butterfly right there? And he looks up and he says, yeah, I see it. And I thought, well, thank God, you're not crazy. I'm not crazy. So it kind of validated what I'd seen before. He just didn't see them, so I'm happy. So they get us there to the marina, and all the first responders were there, the firefighters and the ambulance people and the police and everything. And I'm laying in the bottom of the bow of this boat, and the firefighters get on there, and they put me on this backboard, and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, and they put me on this on the dock, and this firefighter, he grabs a hold of my neck like this right here, and he says, and he's behind me, and he says, hey buddy, he said, what's your name? I said, Mark. He said, my name's Tommy. He said, I'm going to take care of you. I said, oh, good. And I'm laying on my back, and the sun is so bright. I close my eyes, and when I close my eyes, out of nowhere, this old guy starts slapping my face. And I'm like, he said, Mark, stay with us. I said, I'm fine, but you can only look at the sun so long, A few minutes later, I closed my eyes, and the old guy, it wasn't Tommy, the old guy starts slapping me again. I'm thinking, oh my God. And I love Tommy. Tommy's a great guy. He's got this very authoritative voice, and I'll never forget it. I'll do my best impersonation of him. He says, buddy, you slap him one more time, me and you're going to have problems. I thought, I love Tommy. Tommy is the best. But I never saw Tommy's face, and so he's behind me. He's got his hands around my neck, but there that authoritative voice was, and I thought, this is great. They put me on the ambulance, and my wife is on the ambulance, and I yell out to her. I said, I love you, and she said, I love you too. And it was terrible. I don't know what was happening at the time, but come to find out later on, what was going on is that the security of the marina was going to each road and cutting the roads off, and this guy, this ambulance driver, who are in these situations all the time, he yells out, get out of the way, and I'm thinking, am I that bad? what, and I'm so scared. I have no idea what's going on. I'm not bleeding. I don't know what's going on, but the pain is excruciating. And they get me to the hospital, and as they put me on the gurney, and they're wheeling me into the hospital, the ceiling tiles, the drop ceiling tiles. I look up, and as they're wheeling me through, painted on ceiling tiles, a butterfly. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Anyway, so they get me in there to the emergent, the room, and all the doctors and nurses are in there, and they're tossing me and turning me and flipping me, and I'm screaming. And then all of a sudden, it got really quiet, and I was like, what's going on? The good stuff had kicked in. But, I thought, this is great, what's going on? Where are we at? I was so thirsty. And I'm typically not a rude person, but I said, hey, can somebody just give me some water in here? And a nurse came in, and she looked at my wife and said, has the doctor not been in here yet? And she said, no. My wife was a nurse, and she went and got the doctor, and the doctor comes in and says, come here, I need to show you something. So he takes her, and I can see what's going on out of my periphery over here. And he takes the x-ray, and he throws it up on the light there, and he throws 3 or 4 of them up. He says, I can clean all this up. I can clean this up, but it's this piece right here. It's cut his spinal cord 60%, and he'll never walk again. So she came back to me, and I said, what did he say? And she said, you're going to be okay. And she wouldn't have been a good poker player, because immediately she started crying, and I said, that's not what he said, is it? And she said, no. She said, you're never going to walk again. Even saying those words, that was 16 years ago. Even saying those words today, it's hard. It's really hard for me to hear that or even say it. And she said, what do you want me to do? And I said, call the church and have the church to start to pray. I said, then call my mom and dad and tell them. And she said, okay. My brother at the time was a professional motorcycle racer. I mean, the crazy ones, not, the street bikes where they lay the knee down on the concrete and lose their minds and everything. Well, he told my mom and dad, he said, get in the car. He had a BMW coupe at the time. He said, get in the car, we're going down. And my mom and dad said, no, we're going to fly. And my brother said, no, I'll beat you down there. He said, get in the car. And sure enough, so it was my brother, who's 6 foot tall, my dad 6'3", my mom, she's normal size, and then my sister, who's 6'3", they all pile into this BMW coupe, and he breaks every law on the way from Cleveland down to Savannah, Georgia. It's a 6-hour trip, and I think he made it like in 5 hours. And he was flying. He got down there, and he said, Mark, I broke every speed law there was. And, man, that next day, I had surgery, and it took 10 hours for them to fix my back. And when I woke up in my room, I woke up, and I looked up, and painted on the ceiling tile above my head was a butterfly. I stayed there in Savannah for 9 days, and I wanted to be closer to my church family in Cleveland, and I wanted to be closer to my family because they lived in Cleveland as well. And there's a hospital in Atlanta, Georgia called Shepherd Center, and the only way you get into Shepherd Center is you've got to have a spinal cord injury or a brain injury. And so, but I thought if I can just make it to Atlanta, everything's going to be good, So I had an option. I could fly to Atlanta for $13,000 on a helicopter. I could get on an ambulance for $3,000, or I can take a medical transport for $1,300. And I thought, well, my medical bills are going to be crazy, so I'm going to do the $1,300 job. Don't do that. If you guys have a chance to fly, you better fly. So we had decided it's a medical transport, and these two EMTs are back, one's driving, one's back there with me, and everything is going good, And we had made a little code between me and my family. My wife and my mother were following behind us, and they can look through the ambulance and see me, and I could see them, and I would hold up the number 3 for I love you, and they would hold up the number 4 for I love you too. We had cell phones. I don't know why we did it, But just prior to Atlanta, the road, if you guys have remembered since probably mid-'70s to the early 2000s, maybe, Atlanta was under construction. And so about 20 miles south of Atlanta, the road was just terrible. It was just a boom, 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 boom. And I was like, oh, my God. And eventually I noticed that I couldn't tell my family that I loved them anymore. I couldn't lift up my arm. I'm so weak. And the lady back there with me, she's starting to get concerned. She gets a wet washcloth and puts on my head and everything, and I have no idea what's going on. We get to Shepherd Center, and they take me off, and they put me on the gurney, and they're wheeling me through the hospital. And I look up, and as we're going down the hallway, I see a butterfly painted on the ceiling tile. Didn't think nothing about it. And they get me into my room. My family goes, and they leave. They start to go find a hotel close by or whatever, and they said, well, I tell my nurse that night, I said, something's wrong with me. Something's wrong. And he, as a guy, and he was like, no, hey, look, everything's fine. You're just in a new place. Everything's going to be fine. You couldn't be in a better hospital for this condition than what you're in. And I said, well, I hope you're right. Well, all night long, I'm craving Gatorade. I have no idea. It's not my go-to drink, but I want Gatorade. Next morning, a tech comes in, and she says, Mr. Wells, we're going to give you a shower, because I guess after 9 days you start to stink or something. I don't know. And so she picked me up in a Hoyer lift, and when she did, the room just started spinning. I was like, oh, my God, what's going on? And she went in there, and I think she used the soft bristle brush and the hose and everything. They hosed me off, and they brought me back. And when they picked me up in the Hoyer lift, again, the room is spinning. I'm like, what is going on? And thank God for this nurse tech. So she goes and gets a doctor, and she said, something's wrong with this guy, The doctor comes in, and she says, Mr. Wells, stick out your tongue. And when I did, It was as white as this sheet of paper. She said, what's going on is you're bleeding internally, and we have to get you into surgery right now. And but first, I need you to sign some paperwork. I'm thinking, can we not sign paperwork later if I'm dying? She said, no, this first sheet that you're going to sign is so that you can receive blood. And so they started giving me blood. I think I may be Latino. I don't know. I could be. But anyway, and then she said, I said, what's the next sheet? And she says, well, we can't put you to sleep. I said, what do you mean you can't put me to sleep? She says, I have to save your life. You're dying. Now, that's something scary. I said, well, okay, let me sign. So I signed, and about that time, they had already called my family, and my family actually got to the hospital to hear the code blue and the crash cart coming to my room. And so they were obviously concerned, and so I signed this piece of paper. I said, so you're not going to give me any anesthetic or anything like that? And she said, no, we don't have time. I've got to save your life. And she said, I'll never forget this part of she said, this next part's going to hurt. I said, what are we doing? And she said, I've got to put a chest tube in. I said, okay. And so she covered up my face. So she puts one hand right here, and then she grabs this chest tube, and it sounded, honest goodness, it sounded like a 22 going off. It was pow! And I was so scared. And then all of a sudden, it's just instant relief, though. Instant. And I was like, oh, man, am I in heaven? What's going on? But all that bad blood had started coming out. Having a biology degree, she told me later, I had about 3/4 of a gallon of blood sitting inside my pleural cavity. So apparently that rough road on the way to Shepherd Center, that rough road had popped one of the stitches loose inside, so I was bleeding internally all that night. And I come so close to dying. Well, when you get to Shepherd Center, it's a rough start. It's a really rough start. There was a guy there that had been, he was playing baseball for the University of Georgia. And on a Saturday night, they had a ball game. The year prior, they had went to the College World Series. This kid was good. His name was Chance Vesey. At Chance's last bat, he hits a home run. This kid was going to go pro. He was on his way home from after that ball game, and he was in the left lane in a scooter, and a lady in the right lane was in a utility vehicle, and she made a 90-degree turn. He hit her broadside, and instantly he was paralyzed from the waist down. So me and a couple of my buddies that I'd met there, we're all in our wheelchairs. When you get to Shepherd Center, it's rough to start with, but we're going to go in and encourage him. And I had already learned, I was going to live, I was going to love, and I was going to laugh, and I was going to do all those things. And so we go to his room, and the university coaches were there, and his mom and his dad and his grandparents were there, and his mother looked at one of my friends and said, "How were you hurt?" And he said, I was in a car accident." And she looked at the other one and said, "How were you hurt?" He said, "I was in a car accident." She looked at me, and I've got a good sense of humor, and she said, "How were you hurt?" And I said, "Well," I said, I was riding an ostrich. We're going down through there, and I said, that ostrich turned its head and looked at me. I said, it kind of freaked me out, and I fell off. And she said, "Really?" I said, "No." But everybody laughed, and I thought, this is going to be my ministry. I'm going to go, and I'm going to share it with people. It's rough at the beginning, but it gets better. After I got out of intensive care there in Shepherd Center, I went to my regular room, and when I came into my room, my bed wasn't made up. Imprinted in ink on my mattress was a butterfly. I looked up, and painted on the ceiling tile was another butterfly. And I'm thinking, okay, it's not the Georgia Bulldogs from now on. It's the Georgia Butterflies. I think Tennessee can handle the Georgia Butterflies a lot better than the Bulldogs. And so, I was an encouragement to Chance and his family, and I was playing all these mean tricks on everybody, but I loved Shepherd Center. I hated to leave that place because I felt safe. But I stayed there for 2.5 months trying to learn how to walk again. But it wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to walk again. I was still in my wheelchair when I left there. I was at home here in Cleveland. I was reading my Bible, and if you'll indulge me, I've got this story, and it's a story that we've all heard several times. In the book of Luke, chapter number 8, verse number 22, it says this. It says, "Now it came to pass on a certain day that he went into a ship with his disciples, and he said unto them, Let us go over unto the other side of the lake. And they launched forth, but as they sailed, he fell asleep. And there came down a storm and wind on the lake, and they were filled with water and were in jeopardy. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we perish. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and there was a calm. And he said unto them, Where is your faith? And they, being afraid, wondered, saying one to another, What manner of man is this? For he commandeth even the winds and the water, and they obey him." The last 5 words in verse number 24, it says, "And there was a calm." When I read that day, now see, I had taught adult Sunday school class at my church for about 8 years, and we covered almost all the books of the Bible, but when I read that day, the Holy Spirit spoke to my heart, and it was like, he said, "Mark, do you remember when I sent you those butterflies out there on the ocean?" I was like, "I remember the butterflies." He said, "I sent those for you." It was almost like God Almighty in heaven said, "That's all my son Mark can handle. I'm going to send him a butterfly just to get his mind off of what he was going through." I noticed the only time that I was not screaming at the top of my lungs for 4.5 hours was those 3 times that I saw those butterflies out there. And then he spoke to me again. He said, "I had them on your bed. I had them above your head." My nurse had came in to make my bed that wasn't made up. She had butterfly scrubs on. She had a butterfly hair clasp in her hair. And I thought, wow. God, you think, well, Mark, that's just a coincidence. Well, like I said, I don't remember seeing butterfly bushes out in the ocean. If you go out there, they're not out there. So God, I just, here's what I believe. God used a talking donkey in chapter 22 of Numbers. I mean, that's weird. He used a hungry pride of lions in the book of Daniel. In Jonah, he used a great big fish. Do you not think that the God, the creator of this universe, could not use 3 small wings of a butterfly to send to one of his people, one of his sons that's just going through a hard time? That's where my faith is. That's what I believe. Let me tell you what the church did for me. They called me on a Saturday down there at Shepherd Center, and they said, "What can we do for you?" Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm chairman of the board of Catch Ministry. I teach Sunday school. I do all these things. I was always on the end of giving of ministry. I was not getting ready. I've never been used to getting ready to receive as much as what they were willing to do for me. I said, "I don't know what you guys can do for me." But 22 men came to my church on a Saturday, and they cut down a tree that had needed to be cut down. There was a fence that we had started building around our swimming pool. There were only 2 panels that were made, and they finished that fence. They landscaped it. They put daylilies and knockout roses and all this beautiful stuff. They came into my house, and they pulled up the carpet in my living room, and underneath the carpet was this beautiful hardwood floor. They sanded it, and they refinished it, and it was wonderful. And they did that for me because wheelchairs on carpet is not good. And I thought, man, this is wonderful. I came into the physical therapy room there in Shepherd Center, and outlined on the floor is the dimensions of my house. There was an engineer that was in my Sunday school class, and they had taped out to the inch, and they wanted to make sure I was going to be able to make it at my home. And I thought, why are they doing this? They're doing it not just because they love me, but because they love the Lord. I found my name on everything there at Shepherd Center. I found my name on my underwear. I found my name on my shirts. I picked up my shoe, and there was a little white place on the bottom of my shoe. I found my name on the bottom of my shoe. Well, my wife was a nurse. If your name's not written on it in a hospital, it's gone. John 10:29 says, "My Father which gave them to me is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand." My name's written down in the Lamb's Book of Life, and there's nobody but nobody that can take it away from me. And they said I wouldn't walk again. Another scripture that I want to read is found in Philippians, and this is also I kind of got nervous a couple of weeks ago when Pastor Philip was talking about it in Sunday school. I actually went to David and I said, I just want to make sure my hermeneutics is okay on this. But this is, in Philippians chapter 4, it says this. Verse number 6, it says, be careful for nothing, but in everything in prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. That first word in verse number 7, and, in the English language, that's a conjunction. That means if you do what was priorly said, then this will come to pass. And so I was like, Lord, I want to take steps of my own. I want to walk. But also there in chapter 4, verse number 11, it says, not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and suffer need. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Paul says here that he learned this. And whatsoever state he's in, he's learned. And I thought, well, I can learn this too. Whatsoever state, I was like, okay, Lord, if I'm not going to be able to walk, doesn't matter. I'm going to tell people how good you are. Because the Bible, studying the Bible has taught me this. If you quit, you will never know the end that God had intended you from the very beginning of time. So I knew I wasn't going to quit. In Job 23:10 it says, but he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. It's talking about dross, D-R-O-S-S. It's what you do when you heat a metal up and it drives all the impurities out of it. I was teaching Sunday school for 8 years. I was chairman of the board of Catch Ministry. I was talking to people about Jesus. But here's what I learned. I learned that I taught more to people what God has done for me personally than I did all those years teaching about him every Sunday morning. I was reading a commentary in the bottom of my Bible, and it says this. Finally, when all has been said that can be said in relief of the intellectual problem, that is, why does bad things happen to good people? It must be confessed that beyond the revealed purposes of God, there still remains much a mystery. And for this, there is no answer except the attitude of worship, in which we humbly acknowledge that a sovereign God can't be required by men to give all the reasons for what he chooses to do. I'm glad God hasn't told me what his plans are for my life. I mean, even if he told me what his plans were, I wouldn't understand them. I mean, because the Bible tells us his ways are not our ways. And they said I wouldn't walk again. So my accident happened in 2009. In 2011, it was in December. I had to go down to Savannah to do some business. And I wanted to find that firefighter that had a hold of my neck that day. I wanted to meet him. And so we went to this fire department. I wheel up in my wheelchair and I knock on the door, and this lady comes and she answers the door and says, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I said, I'm looking for a guy named Tommy. I said, the only thing I know is that he's got a very distinctive voice. And I said, I just want to meet him to thank him for what he did for me that day. And she said, well, he's not here any longer. He's been promoted to a lieutenant in the Savannah Fire Department. And I said, okay. She said, but leave your name and number. I'll have him call you. 10 o'clock Saturday night, my phone rings, and there's that distinctive voice. And he said, hey, this is Lieutenant Tommy Blackson. I hear you're looking for me. I said, yes, sir. I'm down here in Savannah. I just want to say thank you for what you did for me that day. And I said, I'd like to meet you. And he said, you were having a bad day that day, weren't you? And I said, yes, sir, I was. And he said, well, how's things going now? I said, well, I'm in a wheelchair. I can't walk. But, I thank you for doing that for me that day. And I said, also, while I'm down here, if you can help me find that guy that was slapping me, I'd like to meet him too. And he said, Mark, I don't believe in coincidences. And I thought, oh, good, you must know him. That's what I was thinking. And he said, I don't believe in coincidences. I said, neither do I. And he says, I've actually got another job. And I said, what's your other job? He said, I'm a pastor of a church. I said, really? I said, I'd love to come and give my testimony at your church. And he said, you have tomorrow's service. This is the Christmas service. He gave me the Christmas service. And when I started talking in my testimony that day about what the church did for me, I made the statement, I don't see how people make it without a church family. The fact is they don't make it. And I made that statement. And when I made that statement, there was, after service, there was this guy that came down to the altar, and he came down, and he met me in the back, and he said, I ran away when I was a little boy. I don't have a family of my own. He said, but I joined the church today. And I thought, oh my goodness. How can a sovereign God orchestrate all that he orchestrates? You mean to tell me that he had a pastor holding hold of my neck? One of his very own? Yes. You mean to tell me that he knew that this young man was going to come into the church family that day? Yes. He used somebody as broken as I am. He'll use you, church. I'm almost done. Satan is still attacking me. Used to, when I was teaching an adult Sunday school class, he'd attack me spiritually, and he'd say, Mark, you're not good enough, you need to step down. And I thought, you're a liar. He is. And so, but I always had that doubt. Am I good enough to stand before people and teach them? So he attacked me spiritually. He attacked me physically when my accident happened. He said, if God really loved you, he wouldn't allow this to happen to you. You're still a liar. In 2014, the last trick that he played, he attacked me emotionally. My wife came in and she said, I'm leaving. I said, what do you mean you're leaving? We wasn't fussing, we wasn't fighting or anything, but she was leaving me. I had no idea why. Come to find out the next day, I found out that she was having an affair, and it was tough. I was so broken. I thought, if God would have came to me and said, Mark, I'm willing to heal you completely like what you were prior to your accident, or you can stay like you are and keep your wife, which do you choose? I would have chose that because I loved her. God's still using butterflies in my life. It's not like when I see a butterfly, I go, woo, pretty butterfly. It's nothing like that. It's a God wink. I was in a famous doctor's office here in Cleveland, Dr. Swan. Yeah. I was in this doctor's office one day, and I picked up this Christian magazine, Good News magazine. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. I picked up this Christian magazine, and I started reading it. This was after my divorce, and I'm reading this magazine, and this article, it says, I know what it feels like. And this author starts going through. I had started writing my book. It was called Hope Found in the Wings of a Butterfly. And I had dedicated a chapter to my wife. It was called Ambushed by Grace, and it was going to give her perspective of what she was going through. But since the divorce, I couldn't write. I couldn't write anything else, but I read this article, and it was great. And down at the bottom of it, it said, you can follow me in my glimpses of heaven on Facebook. And I thought, I'm going to have this person ghostwrite my book. So I reached out to her, and before I did, I thought, no, I'm not going to do it. But imprinted in ink on that magazine article was 4 butterflies. So I met the lady, and then I married the lady. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. I mean, God loves me, and he takes care of me. But when I came back home and everything, and before I met Kelly, I wanted to be better. I wanted to be out of that wheelchair, and so I started out using a walker, and then I got down to 2 canes, and then now I use this 1 cane. The thing about it is I can't feel anything below my waist. It's just, you can come up and cut me with a knife from behind, and I'll bleed out. I won't know that I'm even bleeding. So it's like I walk on balloons. And Brother David, could you go over there? So my balance is bad, but let me show you guys where I have perfect balance. Right here. Right here. See, the thing about it is the miracle in my life is not that I can walk. The miracle in my life is that Jesus Christ saved my soul. Because you can go to a hospital and they can make you better, but nobody can come into your heart like Jesus can. So I get to go to spend eternity with him. Go way over there. And I wanted to, go way over there. Wait, keep going, all the way to the wall. And I said, God, I want to take steps of my own. And my wife got me these new shoes for Father's Day. I call them my new tires. They got new tread on them. So if I fall, y'all pick me up. But I can take steps of my own. I walk like a drunk person. But look what God's done for me. It's hard. I've been standing up here for 47 minutes now, and I'm in pain. But the pain is nothing compared to what Jesus went through for me. And I'm not trying to repay him for what he did. I'm trying, come walk with me. I'm not trying to repay him for what he's done for me, but I just want people to see that he loves you and he cares for you so much that he died for you. And that's all I got. And I love you, and thank you for allowing me to speak.